get your popcorn because it's worth fucking watching. That's for sure.
If you guys haven't seen this is spectacular.
I wonder actually if this is the last time we'll see Chritopher Luxon on QandA, because the last clip that we've used from QandA was from last year, where Jack Tame got him to admit that his tax cuts would cause the same amount of inflation as what was happening right now.
Yes.
You remember that one?
Yes,
so
that was great.
So Luxon was there criticising the inflation numbers, and Jack Tame drilled down into his tax cuts and got him to admit, yes, it would be the same. Well, it wouldn't be any worse. It would be the same. So I don't know why Luxon goes on, because it never seems to go so well for him. So let's have a look.
He's not good at this.
Let's have a look at. Let's start having a look at some of these clips. Now, some of these are quite long. I don't know how long we'll just let them roll and how much will come in and out of them. I don't know. So this was an example. Here's an example. As much as the answers from Chritopher Luxon, it's worth watching what Jack Tame does here. This whole idea about what they're going to do with GE. They're going to open it up for more research and make GE more available. Yada yada yada. So Jack Tame wants to ask him about the risks. So the question he's asking is, what risks does opening up our agricultural sector to more GE product and more gene splitting? What are the risks that he's not even saying what would it do? He would like, if you're looking over the whole equation of pros and cons, what are some of the risks that we need to be careful of? This is the basis of this question.
I suppose the risks are different. What do you perceive are the biggest risks?
Well, look, I think I actually see huge upside for New Zealand.
What's the risk, though?
Well, the risk we can mitigate and we can safeguard really clearly.
Risks?
Well, what we're going to make sure is we've got a biotech regulator that is there to safeguard any implications.
Now, quickly on this point, I'm not going to cut in and out too much here, but on this point, he says this about a biotech regulator. That's a bureaucrat. That's a layer of bureaucracy. Now, it's the National Party who keep telling us bureaucrats are ruining the world, but his solution to doing this safely is a bureaucratic layer. I don't get that. And that's actually one point that Jack didn't pick up on. It's like, you guys are the ones who are saying fewer bureaucrats, fewer public servants, but the way you're going to solve the risks is by having more public servants.
Pat, it's just one dude. We're just going to get one guy.
Like that one guy who was looking at all those oil drilling platforms in the Gulf of Mexico.
Actually, it's the same guy.
He's looking for a new job. All right. So remember, he's asking about the risks, and he's not even telling them that it wouldn't work. He's saying, "What are the?" So give us a list of the risks. What are they? Like if you start up an oil platform, one of the risks that's not going to happen, but one of the risks is spilling oil into the ocean. What are the risks for this? So he's looking for actual, tangible things that National should have gone through when they've done their pros and cons, when they've done their case study.
For humans, make sure animal welfare is maintained and make sure that our environment's protected. And that's a model that we're following off the Australian model, where they have a gene technology regulator. And we want to make sure that we're not being reckless, we're being really smart, we're being quite conservative, have a very dedicated regulator. Some OECD countries have very limited regulation around GE, but actually we want to make sure we're on the conservative end of that spectrum.
So back to my question, what are the biggest risks?
Well, I don't see any risks. I think the risks can be managed incredibly well.
So there's no risk.
The risks can be managed incredibly well through a regulator.
Because there's none.
Hang on. The risks can be managed well, but there are no risks. But if there's no risks,
why they're being able to.
Hang on. But if there's no risks, you wouldn't need a regulator. Why do you need a regulator to mitigate the risks if you see no risks? What are the risks? He's not very good at this.
The tigers are completely safe to be around, and that's why we've built a cage.
Yeah, but
which we don't need.
I see no risks with a tiger in their teeth. We'll keep going, shall we?
There are risks, though, right?
There are risks, and each application.
So what do you think are the biggest risks?
Well, each application comes to a regulator for consideration. It goes out for a 30-day submission.
Not answering my question, though. What are the biggest risks?
Well, it depends on the technologies, right? And that's why you want a panel of scientists.
So in a New Zealand context, and I know there will be particular interest around the use of genetic modification or genetic editing technologies around the use of things that might help our emissions profile when it comes to agriculture, for example.
Absolutely.
So what would be the biggest risks in that context, do you
Well,
think?
I don't see any risks on that. I see huge upside for New Zealand. I think the biggest risk is us actually not adopting our technologies and getting them up to speed and dragging New Zealand into the 21st century. That's the much bigger risk.
Are there any occasions in which the introduction of GMOs has had unintended consequences?
Is it almost painful?
I mean, there's a lot of people scaremonger
never happened.
saying, is there crop
Never happened.
contamination?
Except for the
there's
one
actually
Jack's
been
about to
100
mention.
times the land size of New Zealand planted.
But
in
after he mentions
genetic
it,
crops,
it still never
there's been
happened.
no contamination. There's organic producers, say in California, they've never lost their licenses. That doesn't happen.
In Oregon, I see a genetically modified grass seed escaped its containment area and spread over quite a large area, effectively threatening $1 billion industry.
Yeah, but what I'd say to you really clearly is that's a very good example to me, which is that here we have a piece of research in New Zealand. Ag Research developed a ryegrass. It actually has a 23% lower emissions profile and is much more drought resistant. That technology is developed here in New Zealand but can't be trialled outside of the lab, and as a result is taken to the US for trials. That's a tool or a technology we desperately need to do in order to meet our climate goals that we've got and to deal with agricultural emissions, which is a real challenge for New Zealand.
But I asked you before if there are any occasions when the introduction of GMOs has had unintended consequences, and you acknowledge there are.
Well, no, what I'd say to you is...
I just gave you an example.
Well, there are risks, but what I'm saying is those risks are going to be managed conservatively with a good regulator. But the bigger risk is that we are getting well left behind.
Right.
Not solving
But also
the problem.
there's no
Again, though,
risk.
you're just not acknowledging my question there. You're not answering the question I'm asking, which is, do you acknowledge there have been unintended consequences in the past with the introduction of GMOs?
I personally, Jack, I do not feel that the risks are
Do
outweigh
you
the
acknowledge there have been unintended consequences?
There may have been, but I cannot think of any examples of crop contamination. I cannot think of any examples.
Except for the one I just gave you.
The GM DNA comes through in meat, eggs or milk. I can tell you that doesn't happen.
my God.
We make sure we've got safeguards on animal welfare and obviously on human embryonics as well. So
I almost feel bad for him. That's a hard thing to say, but it's almost painful to watch. Like, do you honestly think he'll ever go back on QandA? Can he? There's no risk.
I would say
there's
that
no
that'd be
risks, but
insane.
there's no risk, but we're going to have a regulator to mitigate the risks. It's never happened anywhere except for the example you just gave, and the bigger risk is that we're not going to make enough money. I think I just nutshelled it.
Jake asked 7 times. The only time I've ever seen someone more evasive than that is in court footage. But yeah, it's insane. Like you wouldn't have a conversation with a normal person like that where you're asking a question and this person's just prevaricating for you to say it 7 more times without answer. And like, you can mention risk. Like if you're talking about, we're going to mitigate risks. Well, to mitigate risks, you need to know what the risks are. Otherwise, you're just fucking guessing.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing I want to hear about GMO in a small agricultural country like New Zealand.
Yeah, I obviously can't play all of it. There was another point where basically Jack said, and he wasn't saying it as an absolute, but there are many scientists who say that this is a genie out of the bottle moment. My analogy, not his, that once it's here, there's no going back. Like, it's not like you can contain it within the and it's like once it's here permanently. So it's actually more than just let's give this a go. It's actually, it's like once there's a nuclear reactor here, we are no longer nuclear free. It's here. We don't get rid of it. Like once this happens, it's here. So
like for a lot of our markets, the premium that we can get for our products because we don't do these things is potentially massive. And then the moment that we've left the gate open a little bit, it goes away. So I understand the hesitancy. Let someone else do the hard yards.
All right, second clip we're going to play for Yaz. For Yaz is actually talking about their backtrack on emissions, the emissions scheme, and it's actually asking about the agricultural industry. Are they going to be the people under National to set the emissions prices? Right?
Insane.
Are they going to be the ones that actually do it? Because at the moment the government's doing it, and the agricultural sector doesn't want it. And under National, are the agricultural sector going to be setting the price for emissions? And this is our conversation.
Now, you say that He Waka Eke Noa is dead, at least at the moment, and that the government should return to the industry plan allowing the industry to essentially set prices for emissions on farms. So to be clear, does National think the agriculture industry should be responsible for setting the price of emissions?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about that, and I have more to say about that in the coming week.
Just to answer that question.
No, but I want to be really clear, because
Be clear and please answer that question.
The National Party is very committed to net carbon zero 2050.
Yes.
We're the government that put New Zealand into the Paris Agreement in 2050.
And you're still committed to the Zero Carbon Act?
Deeply committed to the Carbon Zero Act.
You won't back out of that act?
No.
Your
We are
leadership.
deeply
so
committed
back to that
goals.
question. Does National... hang on a second. Does
deliver.
National think the agriculture industry should be responsible for setting the price of emissions?
What we believe is we should work with the agriculture industry to do exactly that.
So you think that the agriculture industry should be the ones doing it?
We think that they can work with government and agriculture
That's
together.
wiffle waffle talk.
No, but partnership's important.
Okay,
Yes.
no, everyone agrees partnership's important.
Well, it isn't.
but ultimately,
no, they don't. This government hasn't done that.
So are you saying that if government sets the price, the agriculture industry doesn't agree, that's it, that it won't happen?
I will talk more about our specifics of the policy.
That's a very simple question.
No, but I can give you some principles to say, first and foremost, we have been very supportive of the industry developing a pricing regime for agricultural emissions. There is no doubt about it. The status quo is not acceptable. Our customers will be demanding it in the future, and so change is needed. Fully agree with that. The government blew it up. They actually killed it off big time.
Well, there are two differences between the government's He Waka Eke Noa position and the industries, right? One is around sequestration and whether or not effectively what is described as temporary planting should be included, and the other is around who should set the price. The government says the government should set the price. The industry says the industry should set the price. I want to know your position. Industry
and
government.
The government killed any consensus that was existing in the industry by actually saying they're going to move production out of the most carbon efficient producers in the world to other countries to make New Zealand poorer and to destroy livelihoods.
Out of interest,
we're not interested
from
in
a
that.
principal perspective, would you let alcohol companies set the alcohol excise tax?
No, but what we're saying here is we're going to partner with the sector to work it out together.
Great question.
That is not what this government has been doing. So our principles are very simple. Change has to happen because the status quo is not acceptable. We will partner with the government, with the sector to do it. We will make sure that we actually have all the tools and technologies, which is where biotech changes come into.
Okay.
And we need to make sure there is no leakage. We're not interested in destroying livelihoods here in New Zealand and moving production offshore.
Right.
New Zealand farmers feed 40 million people around the world. Moving that production, which has to be met by another country or another farm,
the risk that
doesn't change
leakage
global
presents
greenhouse
is
gas
actually
emissions.
is very contested. But anyway, we'll move.
So, and maybe we'll just roll straight into the next clip, Chewy, because the next clip is actually talking more about emissions, and it's talking about national policies to reduce climate emissions. Let's play this because it kind of dovetails into the one we've just heard, and then we'll get to a bit of a chat about what we've heard. So this is about national policies to reduce climate emissions.
I mean, I look at the New Zealand Wind Energy Association. It says many consented projects are currently on hold as the developer waits for market conditions and demand for renewable electricity to increase to make the wind farms commercially available. So with that in mind, if you need to induce demand for renewable sources of energy, let's look at your policies. You will allow cities to sprawl, leading to higher emissions, which is something that Chris Bishop acknowledged to us on the last Q&A. You will scrap incentives for electric vehicles. You will scrap the light rail project. Still?
Yeah, I think light rail at $30 billion is a huge
So
waste of time.
you'll scrap the biggest rapid transit project in New Zealand history. You want to let our biggest emitting sector potentially set its own emissions pricing or hand in hand with government, and you will restart oil and gas exploration. How can anyone take the National Party serious on climate change?
The means by which we deliver our goals, the goals will be
Pretty
very
good question.
We are deeply committed to the outcomes and the goals, make no mistake about that. But it doesn't mean that the government's approach is the only way to do that. We've been in a perverse situation. We take each
It sounds like it's kind of like saying, you know, I've got to get to Auckland in the next few days. I'm going to fly. Chewy, you could get on a boat and go around the western coast of Australia and get to Auckland. You know, it doesn't mean that Pat's solution is the only solution. Both of us will get to Auckland, Chewy. We've just got a different way of doing it. That's how it sort of feels. That's what that response means to me. I'll get on a plane and I'll be there in 2 hours. I'll see you in December. Sure, but we'll both get there. We'll both get to the same outcome. We'll just do it in a different way.
It's about the journey, Pat.
I want to play one more clip here because they talk about oil and gas exploration. That's the same clip, sorry, one more part of this. Because one of the things is to get to whatever it's called, net zero by 2030. Jack makes a really interesting point about if we're going to do all this new exploration, that's going to be null and void in 7 years from now. How did that work?
Those issues on oil and gas, for example, where we now have been importing 3 times the amount of Indonesian coal in order to fire up Huntly, when actually we could be using gas as a transitory transition.
Numbers are wrong.
Because I know that you keep on making that comment about coal. In the last 3 months of 2022...
Last 3 months it's come back, yep. It's been good.
So less coal was brought into New Zealand than in any other quarter in the last 32 years.
But not the experience over the last few years since the decision to ban oil and gas. I'm saying we need gas. It's better than coal. It's not as good as renewables. We'll need it for
We've got to hit totally renewable by
Correct.
2030,
And we're
right?
going to be
So you're going to
pragmatic about
reintroduce gas for a couple of years, and you're thinking that these multinationals that are going to come in and explore for oil and gas,
Short-term
are going to say,
thinking.
we're only here for a couple of years.
And then what we're going to say is over the next 25 years, we're going to double the amount of renewable electricity. There is already in the sector.
The point he's just made very clearly is, do you really think that there's going to be big business who wants to come in and do all that work, not to have a payoff for the next 100 years, that they're going to get their payoff on oil and gas over the next 7 years?
Yeah.
Of course they're not.
Yeah.
Chewy, the one everyone's looking forward to, how many houses do you own, is still to come. Anything from the chat we want to get in there? Anything you want to jump in and talk about?
I want to pop something up, considering we're talking about electricity generation. It's something that I look at quite a bit.
Cool.
So obviously one of the things that comes up heaps when we're talking about our electric future and cars and that sort of thing is this coal, right? We're bringing in fucking heaps of coal because our power grid isn't up to snuff and that sort of thing. We're just feeding Indonesian coal into Huntly, and it's terrible, and that's because of electric cars, right? You can look this up live, okay, on Transpower's website. Our current power generation live, what it's made up of. Now, if you see there at the top, at the moment, on a cold winter's night, when everybody's at home running their heat pumps and all of that sort of stuff, maybe they're charging their electric cars, our percentage of power generation that's renewable is 93%. 93%. So he wants to open up, get rid of coal, because coal's bad. Coal is 87 megawatts of our total production. It's one of the smallest ones. Gas is just up from that 266 megawatts. So I assume he wants to get rid of coal and have more gas. Geothermal generates more power than coal and gas combined.
Centre of the North Island, yep.
Yep, absolutely. Geothermal, something we very rarely think about. Geothermal is double what we generate from wind. So I think it's pretty clear where we have more capacity to build. It's wind. We're not doing anything with tidal generation. There's, hydro is a huge thing. Like, we're not going to pull a hydro dam out of our ass anytime soon, but wind can be done a lot quicker. But yeah, when he's talking, nobody's going to come to New Zealand, find a new gas field, set up everything that's to extract and refine that for a couple of years. He's dreaming, and it's just the fossil fuel industry in his ear. It's so short-term thinking. It's not serious. He is not a serious man.
All right. Let's get to this last clip. And of course, the last clip is the one that people have been talking about as well.
The main event.
The main event. Ding, 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 ding. I don't know if I've got the question involved here or not, but they're talking about capital gains tax and how National has been very ardently spoken out about Labour's capital gains tax. Now, this clip is upwards of 8 minutes overall, I think. I don't know if we'll stop through it or we'll let it play through, but it goes into how many houses Chritopher Luxon owns and how that relates to capital gains taxes. Is there potentially a conflict of interest? Let's release the Tame.
Let's talk tax. It has made up a big part of the election campaign so far. Your party has repeatedly insinuated that Labour is planning a capital gains tax. How many houses do you own?
I've been up front, 7 houses.
There are 120 MPs in Parliament. Who owns the most houses?
I have no idea.
Is there any MP you can
How
name
can you
that
not?
owns more houses than you?
Of course he
I don't
knows.
know, Jack.
Is there any MP you can name that owns more houses than you?
I don't know. I also don't. I don't have a clue
I
who owns
don't
what.
believe you.
When did you buy your investment properties? 4 of those 7 are investment properties, right?
Yes, 4 out of the 7 are investment properties, 3 are residential, and I must have bought them years ago. Yep.
How many years ago?
Back since, I don't know, over different periods of time.
So
He
give
is
us some rough
rattled.
2000 and I can't remember, Jack. Somewhere between when I arrived back home in New Zealand in 2012 to 2019, I presume.
2012. So roughly how much would your 4 investment properties have increased in value since you purchased
Have
them?
no idea.
Roughly how much?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Okay, so if we take the median house value in Auckland, so from 2012, if you bought a house in 2012, it will have increased in value $500,000. So let's take a couple from 2015 as well, $250,000. You said up to 2019, you said?
Possibly, yes. Yeah.
Right. So theoretically, we're looking at capital gains of probably $1.5 million if you sold those houses today.
Oh, it's just walking around money,
Jack.
Jack.
I honestly don't look at it. I don't follow it. I have those houses that
Yeah,
are part of my
so
investment.
if we look
I've
at the
been very
median value,
transparent about it up front, right from day one.
Well, good.
And I've been very open about it.
So
So Luxon's quote unquote defence, if he is needing to defend himself, is I've already told people this. I've told people. They know I own 7 houses. Conversation over.
So if you look at the capital value of those properties, if you were to sell them today, you would make a profit of about $1.5 million. So under National's policy, how much tax would you pay on that $1.5 million?
Well, we don't believe that we need a capital gains tax, an inheritance tax, or a wealth tax.
So how much?
What I love about this interview and what I'm loving about what Jack Tame's doing at the moment is he makes him say the number. He makes him say, I would pay nothing.
It's masterful.
I would pay nothing. Because that's actually, people know that from him saying, well, there's no policy for us, anyone to pay. But he makes him say, I would pay nothing. And it's a very, very good bit of journalism.
Tax is a spending problem, not a tax problem.
So how much tax would you pay? Just to be totally clear, on $1.5 million, how much tax
Well, we
would
don't
you
have a
would you
capital
pay?
gains tax here in New Zealand, Jack, so I wouldn't pay anything on a realised gain. So what I'm saying to you is, but I know I get where you're trying to get to, but the point is really clear. In New Zealand, we have a spending problem in New Zealand at the moment.
So, no, but let's just,
and this is a government trying to raise lots of new creative taxes.
You're the one who keeps on bringing up the capital gains tax, so I want to focus on it. So $1.5 million in capital gains, $0 in tax. How do I know?
You're talking about
that's how much
unrealised gains at the moment, right?
But if you were to sell them, right? If you were to sell them today, you'd make, let's say, back of the envelope, $1.5 million. You'd pay $0 in tax. So how do I know that you are not just opposing a capital gains tax, because that'll mean you pay more tax?
No, that's not fair. What we're talking about
Yes, it is.
Look, I mean, I'm involved in conversations on broad housing policy.
Yeah, so
and the housing policies are linked between owning homes, renting, state houses and emergency housing.
And
They're
investing.
all interrelated issues, right?
Irrelevant.
Back to the question, though, how do I know that you're not just doing it for your own gain?
No, because the government's own advisors said don't remove interest tax deductibility, don't extend the white line, don't add costs to
I'm asking about capital
renters.
gains tax. What did they say about capital gains tax?
The capital gains tax, I'm
Didn't
telling you,
answer
we're
that.
not having a
No, I
capital
know.
gains tax
Yeah,
on
no, I'm
inheritance or
very
wealth
clear
tax.
on that.
Because what we've got is a spending problem. In
No,
this
no,
country,
no,
not
no.
a tax problem.
You're trying to go somewhere else
Not a debt problem. We've
God.
got a debt problem and a
Please,
tax
you want to
problem
be the
because
Prime
we're not
Minister, you
spending.
can answer these straight questions.
I'm giving you a straight answer.
How do I know that you don't oppose a capital gains tax? Because you, under a capital gains tax, would have to pay more tax.
I can tell you because I've been very transparent up front. I'm involved in broad housing
Because
policy
I've told people
conversations.
that I own
I
houses.
can tell you those things don't enter my mind about what happens for me
But we just have to
personally.
take your word on it, right?
But if there's an issue, I would talk to the Cabinet Office. I'll declare all of that. If they tell me to do something different, I'd do something different.
Why isn't this a conflict of interest?
Well, it's not because it's a broad conversation about housing policy. There are many MPs that have multiple houses in Parliament.
Yeah,
right?
but you,
not just me.
But you own the most investment properties. You own 4 investment properties, which by my count is the most investment properties of any MP in Parliament. You want to be Prime Minister, and one of your explicit promises is that you oppose a capital gains tax. A capital gains tax that would tax people like you.
Yeah, and what I can say to you really clearly is I'm involved in broad housing policy conversation. If there was something specific, I
Irrelevant.
can imagine that I'd want to recuse myself if a property had a red zone designation or something
So
like that.
would you
I will
recuse
take
yourself
all
from
my
any
interests to
conversations around
I will take
capital
all my
gains tax?
interests to the Cabinet Office, and whatever the Cabinet Office says I need to do, I don't take 12 times to respond to that mitigation.
No
if there is a real or a
way.
perceived conflict, I'd respond to their wishes. So I'm interested in solving problems in New
Yeah,
Zealand.
and
getting houses
I'm
built.
interested in your position on
And
capital
that's
gains tax
something
because
this
you've been very
government
strong
hasn't
about
achieved
it.
in 6 years.
How many people are employed by your investment properties?
Sorry?
How many
love
people are
this.
employed by your investment properties?
Sorry, but they're investment properties. What do you mean?
That's the point, right?
You're trying to make a point about capital gains tax.
No, the point I'm trying to make is actually about productivity. Because you said in your maiden speech that productivity was the number one thing holding back our standard of living. You've sold yourself as a top business leader and economic expert, and with all your economic nous, you followed the incentives and you chose to put your money for investments into houses. And now
see his eyes go,
you are going
no.
to reverse all of those changes to property investment incentives. You will loosen the laws on residential landlords, you'll pull back the bright line test, you will reinstate interest deductibility. My question is, what will stop other New Zealanders from just doing what you did, following the incentives and pouring their money into unproductive assets like houses?
Let's just talk the rental market, right? Because it's been really unfair what Jacinda Ardern, Grant Robertson and Chris Hipkins have said.
You can almost see him. You can see his face. Like if I come back here, we don't have to play it. I'll turn the sound off, but you can see his face going, how am I going to respond? How am I going to respond? How am I going to respond? What am I going to say to this? How am I going to say to this? You just watch Luxon's face the whole time. He's just like, oh shit, okay. What am I going to say? How am I going to respond to this? What am I going to come out of it with? Yes, I'm a big believer in productivity, and the way I earn money is through non-productive assets. How am I going to respond to this? Oh crap! What shall I say? Have I got a talking point that what his lips are moving? Is that his towel? I will.
Not. He goes. What? He goes. No lips, like that, and he blinks a lot when he's pissed.
And now he's going.
He is as angry and unsettled as I've ever seen him.
Yep.
In this
and
interview.
now he's going, how am I going to respond? How am I going to respond?
Ardern, Grant Robertson and Chris
And he goes, I know. Talking points.
Market, right?
Well, there's talking points about bad
really
national.
Unfair
Bad Labour.
Jacinda Ardern, Grant Robertson and Chris Hipkins have said. They have said that people who own rental homes are tax and property speculators. That is not the case.
Which they are.
72% of all landlords.
I'm a former landlord.
Investors
Absolutely.
Who might have one or two rental properties that are augmenting for their retirement and for their superannuation, right? They are not evil property speculators. The government also received
said that
advice
they were evil.
to say, please don't actually remove interest deductibility. It's a legitimate business expense all around the world. And please don't extend the bright line test. Why? They're adding costs to landlords that lead to higher rents. Rents are up $160 a week under this government. I think about $50 of it is linked to those two policies.
So
those policies are bad policies.
Okay,
right?
so
That's why they need to be removed.
That doesn't answer my question, though. What is to stop other people from just doing what Chritopher Luxon, the economic expert, did and pouring their money into unproductive
I have a
assets like
range
houses?
of investments in what I do with my interests. I make no apology for it. And I know you and I have had this conversation before.
You're not giving me any examples of why people wouldn't just do what you're doing.
I'm a Kiwi kid who came from a pretty
I'm a Kiwi kid. I ate my weight.
I worked hard.
I'm not attacking you for your success. I'm not attacking you for your wealth. No. I'm simply
What
asking
you're saying is
why
angry.
New Zealanders
can't come into Parliament and actually make a contribution.
No,
and
what I'm saying is, why shouldn't other New Zealanders who want to emulate your success follow the same incentives you did and pour money into unproductive assets when you have said that productivity is the biggest problem facing this country?
Individuals make their own decisions around a mix of investments around their own personal interests and their personal assets. That's what I've done. What I've been really clear with everyone from day one is I've been incredibly transparent about it all. If at any point in time the Cabinet Office came to me and said, Chris, there's a conflict of interest, you need to take advice, and I would take that advice and do whatever they asked me to do. But the point is, this is broad housing policy. We are not building houses. The government has failed on every level.
You haven't given me any answers on productivity, which is what I've asked you about. But I want to ask you about.
All right, and then basically, there's another part of this conversation that got a little bit of noise about would he resign if there was any changes to abortion. We're not going to look at that tonight because it's a bit of a typical politician thing. Would you give it up? But we've just watched the final of the Rugby World Cup, basically, with the two best teams in the world. Well, actually, the one.
I was going to go with a
and the one
boxing
under.
analogy.
Okay, you go first.
I was going for a boxing analogy. Jack out of the corner had Luxon on the ropes the entire time and never stopped beating on him. It was spectacular. I mean, there's questions that Jack was actually being super conservative with his estimation of how much capital gains he'd take.
Yeah, the housing prices.
And do you think realistically someone has forgotten when he purchased a whole ass house?
Well, if he did,
that he's not aware
but that
of
actually
his
speaks
portfolio's
to it.
worth.
If he did,
Bullshit.
doesn't that speak to either how much money they've got that they don't even know, or how much they want to avoid this conversation?
Yep. And the other point that he kept on going back to, right, is it's not a conflict of interest because I only talk about housing in very broad terms. Correct. One of the very broad terms you're talking about is we don't want a capital gains tax because I personally will profit over $1.5 million tax-free dollars. When we had those business leaders on the show the other week, and they were, the story of, the selling an office building and him going to his accountant, how much tax do we pay on this? And the accountant saying none. We have been running that particular scam for near 40 years. And that is why everybody with a bit of money has poured it into property. It is a safe bet. It does not have the risks of pouring it into a business that may or may not succeed. So therefore, the businesses that might have a good idea get no funding and everybody's buying houses. It's dumb.